Buenos días a todos. Mil disculpas por el retraso. Tuvimos un problemita técnico, pero ya estamos aquí todos. Mi nombre es Joana Gómez, jefe de eventos de la Cámara de Industria y Comercio Colombo-Alemana. El día de hoy tengo el gusto de presentar a Becky Cardoso, quien es socia fundadora de la empresa Global Gap, empresa afiliada a la Cámara Colombo-Alemana. Una de las principales preocupaciones al establecer una empresa colombiana es el pago del director y de sus empleados, lo cual hace parte del presupuesto inicial de la empresa. Hoy les presentaremos algunos aspectos interesantes y porcentajes para tener en cuenta en esa planeación y algunas oportunidades de ahorro en la nómina que su empresa puede analizar. Entender el contexto local le facilita sus negocios en Colombia. Para todos los asistentes, en su cajita del chat pueden hacer sus preguntas y al final, con mucho gusto, nuestra conferencista les dará respuesta. Todos están con cámara cerrada y micrófono cerrado. Entonces, Becky, muchas gracias y bienvenida.
Hola, Joana. Muchas gracias. Guten Tag and guten Morgen para todos, for everybody. I'm glad to be here sharing this information because lately we have had many clients that have come to Colombia with many surprises, meaning that they are not very well informed about contracts or payroll payments. And that's why we thought that as we support them with their payroll strategy and payments, we wanted to share this information, which I think is very meaningful for everybody. As Joanna said, please type your questions. I don't know if we have time to solve all the questions, but I will be glad to contact you after the presentation and answer your questions with more detail. So let me, here is my email and information, and John is going to send you that information as well. So we are going to talk about foreign employees, labor contracts in Colombia, how you as a company could hire employees using something called temporal service companies, then everything related to social security and payroll fees, and then we're gonna go through a payroll example in a spreadsheet, which I thought would be easier to understand and to follow. So these, just let me move these. Okay. So for foreign employees, it's very important to understand that all employees in Colombia have to follow the Colombian Labor Code. That means that there is not a difference between a foreign employee and a Colombian employee. The law for both of them is the same. The thing is that when an employee comes to Colombia, has to focus in fulfilling the immigration law and the visa and cedula requirements. So it's it is very interesting because that's the first topic that you should be focusing on, and also on the planning of the code. So it will be both things at the same time. Focusing in all this paperwork that you have to fulfill and focusing on the budget. Lately, some employees have come to us saying we are not sure about our deductions, we are not sure about how income tax how much income tax we will have to pay after working in Colombia. So to clarify all of these will be very important, so the person will feel safe, will feel tranquil, confident about working in Colombia, and that won't be like part of another challenge for them, because moving to another country is already a challenge. But if you move to another country with many challenges and then you don't know very well how much your payment is going to work, that's going to be another challenge. So that's very important to focus on. Okay. Then the first topic to talk about, and the starting point, is the contract. So we have kind of like 5 types of contracts here: the open-ended labor contract, the fixed-term contract, and a specific project contract, transitory contract, and independent professional contracts. And this has to do with 2 topics. When you are bringing a foreign employee to work in Colombia, or when you are planning for your budget. So the type of contract that you have with your employees and the budgeting or the planning of the cost of each contract will help your budget. So please start on the contract, and then when you set up the conditions of the contract, then you can start budgeting. That's very important. So when you have an open-ending contract, something that you have to make sure is that it's put down in writing. So if it is a verbal contract, it has the same conditions, but it's better to write everything so everybody could be in the same page. The trial period cannot be more than 2 months, even though it is an open period ending contract. The trial period cannot be more than 2 months, and that has a meaning, because if the employee stays in the type of work more than 2 months, then the obligations or the indemnification or the ending payments of the contract will be more. So you always have to make sure about these dates, because if you overpass the 2 months, the obligations will be different. And then in this agreement, you can agree the type of salary. We're going to go over that because it could be a lump sum salary or a specific, like a regular salary. I will call it regular salary. There is subordination, there is a payment, and in these contracts, you also have to talk about work equipment, and lately with the new rules of working from home or teletrabajo, then you have to write these on the labor contracts as well. Then something important about contracts, another type of contract, is the fixed term contract. So when you are testing employees in Colombia, this is the contract that should be used, because you can go from a fixed term contract to an open-ending period contract. So these labor contracts that cannot exceed 3 years. And if you, let's say that you agree to a contract of 1 year, then, and you don't say anything about this contract, and you don't end this contract, then the next contract will last another year. And if you don't say anything, there is gonna be another contract of another year. So, and then after 3 periods, 3 years, then it's gonna be an open-ending contract and the obligations of an open-ending contract. So the trial period cannot exceed 1/5 of the initial term. That means 2.4 months. If the contract is 1 year, you can make the calculation. And it is very important that the termination is announced in this type of contract, because as there is like a fixed term, you have to allow the person or the worker to find another working opportunity. So that's why it is very important to communicate with the employee. So these other contracts that we're going to talk about, the specific project and the transitory contract, are very important to take into account, because on these type of labor contracts, you can't use them for a specific project. So, and it is very interesting because it does not require termination announcement, and the term depends on the carry out of activities. So you can list at certain activities, and when that, and you can state in the contract that when those activities are done or delivered, the contract is gonna end. So that's why this type of contract is interesting. But at the same time, you can, in the same contract, you can state a period of time in which the job or project should end. So you can do both. And the trial period for these specific project labor contracts is 2 months. Then you have transitory labor contract, and this transitory labor contract agreement has something very important. Two things that are very important. One, that the term cannot exceed a month for this transitory, and then that the activities have to be different from the main purpose of the company. So for example, our main purpose as a company, Global Gap, is to have services like auditing, accounting, payroll. Those are our services. So we cannot hire somebody in a transitory contract to, I don't know, to audit a specific company, because that's what we mainly do. But we can't have a transitory contract to build up our office, because we don't build up offices. So that's an example of this type of contracts. And this is a perfect contract for a short-term, a specific job. So that's why it's a very interesting tool. So which things should not be written in a contract? I call them exclusions from contracts. You should not be writing in a contract payments that will not be part of the Social Security contributions. That's against the law, and almost or everything should be taken into account in the Social Security contributions. We are going to talk about that again, because I'm going to give you some examples in which you can save some money. But let's start from this main statement. You cannot make employees doing or performing illegal behaviors or some sort of illegal works task, and that should of course not be in a contract. And something very interesting is that in Colombian law, the non-compete clauses are ineffective. What does that mean? That means that for the Colombian labor law, the non-compete clauses are not acceptable, because that goes against of the rights of work. So you might think, well, I could write in this contract that this person that is doing the sales for me and learning all these important things about our technology and everything else cannot go to the another company that does the same. Well, that's going to be ineffective because it's against the law, because you should have your right to work in our law system. So please take that into account. So that's those 4 type of contracts are when you hire someone and then you have a contract and then they are fully gonna work for you over an open term of time or over a certain amount of time. Good. Then we have other type of professionals or other type of entities that perform services for your company or for our company. So we have here independent professionals, or we have service entities. So we're independent professionals. So make sure about first that they are really independent and that they send you a letter of their tax status and how much you have to withhold from them before you pay them. That's very important, and that should be in a form because, as you might know, there are many different withholding rates. So if you don't state this with them and you make sure that they are getting the money that they are expecting, you are going to have discussions with the people that are helping you, your contractors. So to avoid these issues, it's better to set up things ahead of time. Make sure about the service, the fees, and here it is very important. So besides the tax status, which I'm stating here, it is very important that they send you their Social Security payments. So for some, as you might notice already, or you will notice if you're not here in Colombia yet, that in our tax system and social security system, there is a lack of trust. That's why we have as many withholding, and that's why the companies, your legal entity, has to make sure that independent professionals pay the social security, because the government do not believe that they are going to pay it themselves. So they have to send you their invoice, and with the invoice or with the cuenta de cobro, which is a letter in which they state their fees, you should ask them for the receipt of their social security payment. And why is that so important? Because if you don't have it, you cannot deduct this payment from your income tax at the end of the year. And people think that who is going to ask me for this? Well, the government, when they're gonna return your taxes because you were withhold more on your income tax, the first thing that they are gonna focus on is all these expenses of independent professionals, because they know that companies not all the time make sure about these. So that's why you really need to make sure you have all these documents. Who else is going to ask you for this? Your auditor and your accountant as well. And in the first place, your accountant, because that's the first person that will help you to make sure that you fulfill all these rules to have your taxes or your finance healthy and that you won't have any problems. And when you have service with entities, for example, an outsourcing service like accounting and payroll, I'm giving you my easiest examples, then you should ask for the social security of their employees, because if you hire an entity that doesn't have all this payment and this risk with the labor, then you will be at risk too, because you have, when you hire these entities and in the contract is not stated that you are not responsible for the employees. If the employees are working with you, then you will be responsible as well. So it's like a shared responsibility. So if you don't want to have this shared responsibility, that should be stated in a contract, and you might as well ask for their documents to make sure that everything is in rule. So all this compliance is very important. Okay, so let's move to this, because I think this is a good opportunity for companies. There is something called temporal services, and of course there are this type of companies in many other countries, and you can use these temporal services entities to hire for the same time some employees, then put them on your payroll. That could be a strategy. Or when you need to cover a certain position, or when you have peaks of work that you need more people than the people that you usually need. And these temporal services entities could be of great help explaining and teaching you how the labor law in Colombia work. So that's why it is an interesting resource. There are many companies that perform this service. So if what does it mean to be at work yet, and this EST, which states for a temporary service entity. The employer is the temporary service entity, not you. That is an advantage. And then the employee is entitled to the same salary as if that employee was your worker. So you kind of have to manage to have the same rules for your direct employees and your EST employees. And they have the right to the same rights of food, transportation, recreations, that are any other benefits that your own direct workers have. So, and it is very important to fulfill those rules if you want to use this tool. And as I said, when you can use them, when you need to replace people from vacation, where it is an occasional work, and when you have more work than usual, which is good for everybody. And then these contracts start with a term of 6 months. It could be less. You need to discuss that with the temporal service entity depending on the position. But all these contracts, as I said, are fixed term contracts, and you can't increase the term or have another contract of the same term. But I definitely think this is a very nice tool to be used. So now, we are moving from the contract to the next step, which is very important in your payroll, which is all the Social Security enrollment. And then we are going to start thinking of how you budget the cost of an employee in Colombia. So there is, for the Social Security, it is called Segura Social Integral in Spanish, and this is the short name of it. And then you have three important items: healthcare, pension, and labor risk. So for the healthcare, so this concept of maximum contribution base is very important, because when you have executives that have high salaries, the contribution of the Social Security will be only, so the maximum, the threshold is 25 minimum wages. So let's remember that the minimum wage in Colombia at the moment is 908,000 pesos. So the 25 minimum wages is gonna be about 23 million pesos. So if somebody have a salary above that threshold, you only contribute to the Social Security system up to the 25, up to the 23 million. Or if that executive get a bonus once a year that is related to their performance, then they get their salary and they get the bonus. But if the of those two payments are above the 25 minimum wages, then just contribute or pay Social Security or healthcare up to those 25 minimum wages. So then it is the same for the pension system. And then we're going to talk about the labor risk Social Security in a minute. So for the healthcare, the employer, so the company pays 8.5% and the employee 4%. So when you make your budget, and this money in the healthcare, this 4% and this other 4% is withheld by the company and paid to the Social Security entities. So that's healthcare. In the pension system, the total is 16%, the employer pays 12%, the employee 4%, and we have the labor risk. So on the I'm going to go back to the healthcare and I'll make some comments. So for the healthcare, the entity has to be enrolled to the healthcare entity. So when you're starting a business in Colombia, first you have to enroll your entity to the healthcare entity, to the pension entity, and to the labor risk entity. And then you are able to start enrolling your employees to the different entities. So that's one step that only happens once. When you are starting your business, you start enrolling to this entity. And then every time you have a new employee, you need to enroll them to these entities. And you have to do all the process before the person starts working. Because if you don't, you have somebody like working, not fulfilling the law. So that's very important. And another thing that is mandatory that I want to mention is that every employee before starts working needs to have some medical test that should be part of their curriculum or all their files, and that's mandatory by law. And there is another compliance that the companies have to make, which is like the integrated system of working conditions and the working place. And to fulfill this system, you have to have all these health exams for each of your employees. So I'm going to summarize again. So you have to have the enrollment of the entity and the enrollment of each person. And then you have to have this test or exam that the person has to have before starting working for your company. Okay? So I wanted to mention that on the healthcare. On the pension system, there is something that I want to mention for foreigners, and it is that if the person that comes to Colombia is already paying for the pension plan in their own country, you can double check if there is a tax agreement with that country, or if the country is in a list in which you can avoid paying pension in Colombia because you are paying it in your home country, let's say in Germany. So that's very interesting, and that's one of the things that should be planned ahead of time, because then the employer is gonna save this 12% and the employee is gonna save this 4% of payments for our social security system. And it's not really savings, is that you are paying those amounts. Could be the same percentage, it could be a different percentage, it depends on the agreement with the employer, but you are paying that in another country, so you don't have to pay it here. And it actually makes sense, because if the foreign employee or the person that is coming to work in Colombia is not thinking of staying here in long term, then they won't get their pension here, and so it doesn't make sense to contribute on their pension here in Colombia. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about is the labor rate social security. So actually, when you are working in Colombia, you have two kind of insurance that protect your health when you're working. So you have this healthcare, which is mandatory. Then you have this labor risk. So depending on the level of risk, there is from type 1 to type 5, and this is like insurance. So let's say that I'm type 1 because I'm sitting on my computer and in my house, everything is very quiet, very safe, I'm not going out to any places. So my company is gonna rank the type of risk I have, and it's gonna contribute a percentage, at this percentage on my salary. This is mandatory by law. This cannot be avoided. So you have the labor risk and the healthcare. On the top of that, the company could decide to give the person something like a better quality health service that is called prepagada. So you kind of like a paid the mandatory healthcare for everybody, but you can't agree with your employee to pay a better healthcare. So that's very common in Colombia, and for most workers on the office or directors or managers, that additional healthcare payment is usually agreeing to pay. So that there will be like 3 different services: this insurance, the labor risk, the regular healthcare, and the, how do you say, like better service healthcare that you agree with your employees. This I wanted to leave in Spanish because it is a very interesting, all these payments are, from my perspectives, I call them payroll fees here, but it's just more taxes to the payroll of your employees in Colombia. So on the top of the healthcare, the pension, the labor risk, you have these contributions. So these ICBF is an entity that takes care of the children with difficult conditions in Colombia. So all employees should, all companies should pay 2% on the salary of their employees. This SENA is an entity that takes care of the education of our country, and then you have to pay 3% on the payroll of your employees. And this Caja de Compensación Familiar has many purposes. One of them is recreation, another of them is housing, or they also manage the insurance of unemployment. They have many other purposes, but you have to pay 4%. So all these 9% is an additional tax on the payroll. Something very interesting here, and this is an exception that you should take into account in your budget, is that for employees that receive less than 10 minimum wages, so less than 9, let's say, remember that the minimum wage in Colombia is 908 100. So if they get paid less than 9 million pesos, let's round it up in 9 million, you don't contribute to the 12% of healthcare. So that's very interesting for your budget as well. So there are some thresholds that you should take care of, because it's going to save money. So if we go back here, so you get to be covered because the person is enrolled. But if they don't make more than that money, so the employer doesn't pay the 8.5, and the employee still pays the 4%, but these payments, the ISBF and the SENA, the company don't pay them. So that's very interesting to focus on that threshold. So before moving on the payroll example, it is important to set up your workplace regulation. So to have something called Reglamento de Trabajo, so your workplace rules, like specific for your company, how many hours the employees are working, if they have some flexibility, if they're going to be working from home or not. All of that, you have to have your own rules. So it is mandatory for an entity that has a commercial entity that has more of 5 employees, an industrial entity that has more than 10 employees, or an agriculture entity that has more than 20 employees. And these regulation or set of rules needs to talk about workplace harassment, like rules, discipline and all the consequences, hygiene and industrial safety, if there are maternity leaves or any type of permits, and the rules to defend the common interest from the employer perspective and from the employee perspective. So this is very important, and many companies haven't updated their workplace regulation, and they need to be updated because there is a law that from last year that said so many things have been changing in the working place. It is a mandatory updating date, and there has been many rules that are happening after COVID hit. So it is very important to upgrade these regulations and make them to be, I don't know, meaningful with the law, with the current law, like they match the current law and that they match the current things that are happening on the workplace. So we're gonna move into the payroll. So before moving into the payroll, I don't know, and this is gonna be quick. So I don't know if you have any questions. So, Joana, no sé si hasta ahí hay algunas preguntas.
Sí, tenemos una pregunta. ¿Ya la tienes?
Okay. So the question is, a contract with fixed term of 1 year can be updated 2 times, so it lasts 3 years? Yeah, that is definitely very well understood by the person who asked this question. That's definitely the way it works. But if you, so I'm just gonna repeat this. If you have 3 contracts of 1 year in a row, then this contract immediately by law becomes open term contract. That's what I want. That's what that means. So, and here it is another question. Is there employment relationship recognition risk with these independent professionals? I mean, risk that company must recognize these independent professionals as employees. Well, as I said, yes, there is a risk. So the best way, so if you are having an independent professional working in a daily basis or in a monthly basis or very often with you, to have a contract in which you say, these are the responsibilities and the risks that you're taking on your own. I'm not responsible for these. And in that way, you will cover yourself on not being liable of these responsibilities. So there is another question. So we have to understand that not working for competitors clauses are not legal in Colombia, even if it is agreed in the contract, definitely. So they are written in the contract, but they are, besides that they are kind of illegal, they are ineffective, because if the person goes to the competitors, they could easily say in front of the law that they have a right to work, and that's on the top of everything else. So they are able to work with the competitors. From my perspective, yes. There is no way to really avoid that in our law. And something that you might have heard of from lawyers is that the Colombian labor law always, their approach is to protect employees rather than to protect the rights of the companies. So they will always be there to protect the employees rather than the entity. That's the way it works. So we're gonna move into my payroll example. So I'm just gonna open it up here. So there is another question. Okay, there is not more questions. So let me just make sure what I have here. So So I'm just going to make sure that you're looking at my Excel spreadsheet. Joanna, ahí se está viendo mi Excel.
Sí, sí,
Okay, good.
ahí sí.
Okay, so we're gonna do this really quick, and then we can move into questions in this regard. So let me just move this up here. So we have, in Colombia, we have two types of salaries. I'm going to call it regular salary, a lump sum salary. Then here we have, in a regular salary, you have the payment on health insurance, the payment on pension, the payment on something called Fondo de Solidaridad Pensional. I'm going to explain that later, and the withholding tax. I'm gonna call it like that. So this is actually, I have many remarks here. So these are the payments that are done by the employee. Okay, so these deductions are taken by the company, and this is paid on behalf of the employee to the health entity. This is paid on behalf of the employee to the pension entity, and this Fondo de Solidaridad Pensional is an extra payment for the pension, like a pension fund, but it only applies when you meet a threshold of 3 minimum wages. So when the employee meets that threshold, then you have to make that contribution as an employee. And then the withholding tax or retención, I'm gonna keep it here in Spanish. And this is like pension contribution. Then this withholding depends on your status. So if you are a Colombian worker, then there is two methods to calculate your withholding, and this withholding tax is what is gonna contribute to your income tax. But if you are a worker coming from Germany, your withholding tax will be at the beginning 20% of your salary, always, until you meet the 183 days of residency in Colombia, and then you can go to another method of calculating your withholding tax, and then what would be withhold from your salary was going to be less. So that's the way it works. Then you have these payments, health. I'm going to write here health, and you can, if you want to take a picture of the screen, is okay. So we have the health, the pension, this ARL, as I said, depends on the type of risk. The ISBF, which is like the entity that takes care of the child in Colombia, education, and Caja de Compensación, which is like many services together. So these payments have to be paid by the entity, by the company, to these entities on behalf of the employee. But there is something very interesting here. So there is the prima, the cesantía, severance, then the interest on severance, and vacation. So these two things, and I'm going to put them in another color here, are very interesting because an employee on a regular salary scheme in Colombia gets paid not 12 salaries a year, but 14 salaries a year. So, and how are those 14 salaries paid? So, so you get paid on monthly basis, every month your salary, and then this prima is paid half of your salary in June and half of your salary in December. So in June, it's a happy month in Colombia. It's number 2 because we have many celebrations, many festivals in June and then Christmas in December. But the other good news is that you get your salary plus another half of your salary in June and in December. So that's the way you get your 13 salary. And then the severance, how does the severance gets paid? So that is paid, the company actually cannot handle the money to the employee. These need to be sent by the company to an entity which purpose is to manage the severance of everybody. So in February, this always happens in February each year. So you have to adjust your budget, or your, I would say your cash flow better to make this payment in February. So you put one salary of your employee in this entity. So how does the employee get this money back? They get it back saying, I'm going to spend this money. There are three special reasons to take this money out of this fund. One, if the employee is going to buy property or they're going to fix up their house, they have to show proof that they are going to do that. Second, if they are going to study and they are going to do their master's degree or some special class, they can use that money for education. And then the main purpose of that money is to when you are unemployed. So that way, like if you lost your job, you just show there that you have finished the contract with your employer, and then you can get the money as an employee. So those are the 3 ways. Then this 1% is that interest on severance that the entity has to pay to the employee. So it is 1% of the salary. So this is 1% monthly. So I have these calculations here on monthly basis because in our payroll, we need to make an allowance each month for these payments. So that's why I have those percentages there. And then vacation. So vacation in Colombia is 2 weeks. 2 paid weeks is the vacation in Colombia. So that's why I have this allowance here too. But if you want to change it in the payment agreement, that could be changed. So any benefits, like additional benefits that you have that you want to give your employees in Colombia or coming from Germany, you can give them those benefits. So that's the way the regular salary works. So then we're going to move to the lump sum salary. So I want to know, let me reduce this and see if you have any questions until here. Joana, ¿hay alguna pregunta relacionada con el regular salary?
No, no señora, no tenemos preguntas.
Okay. And we just have like 15 minutes more, so for everybody that has meetings, we're just gonna talk about this 15 more minutes. Okay, so why do I have the minimum wage here? Because some companies, maybe they just want to have part-time employees, 4 hours a day, and they want to pay them the minimum wage. Well, the minimum wage is a threshold also for the Social Security. What does that mean? Even if a person makes less money than the minimum wage, they have to contribute to the Social Security system on the minimum wage basis. So that's very important to take into account. And there are some other obligations that arrive from when a person is hired with the minimum wage. So for the example, there is a transportation allowance that has to be paid, which is, at the moment is about $30, maybe 25 euros. And employees that earned less than 2 minimum wages have to pay, have to get work equipment and apparel every 4 months. So that's another rule that comes up with the minimum wage payment, which is very important. So here we have something very interesting, which is the lump sum salary. So the lump sum salary is another type, actually it's not a type of contract, but it's a type of payment, because you can have open term contract with a regular salary, with a lump sum salary. So what the lump sum salary does is that it allows the employee and the entity to make the payments to the Social Security system only on the 70% of the salary. So as you can see here in my math, all these calculations, and I didn't, are based on the 70% of the salary. For example, here I didn't calculate the descuento de pensión, because for this example, I'm thinking that it is a person from Germany that showed me their evidence that they were paying their pension plan there in Germany. So that's why we are not paying, we are not calculating that here. But if we were to calculate that, it would be this number by 4%, sorry. So it would be 330,000 pesos, which is about $100. So this could be the savings for the entity. And here, if we were to calculate the savings for the company, in this scheme, it will be this by the 12%. So it would be about 200 euros or $250 the saving for the company. So the company could pay for the pension in the same amount in Germany, or the person could contribute in the same amount in Germany with the payment of the company, and they will avoid to pay for the pension here. But so then the contributions are the same to the ARL, SBFC, and Caja de Compensación. But something interesting on this lump sum salary is that the person doesn't have a right to prima, doesn't have the right to severance and interest on severance. So this type of lump sum salary is a benefit for the company, but it can be yes or no a benefit for the person, because you could agree on get higher salary on this scheme and get more money on your cash flow, and then you won't get these benefits that are just paid in a certain periods of time in your over the year. So this, it could be this some lump salary could be a good strategy for the company and a good strategy for the person to get paid more of in the salary that they have agreed, and that could help their monthly cash flow. So that's what I wanted to share related to the calculation of the payroll. There are many other details, and for your budgeting, details are very important. Some other strategies that you can use to make the cost of your payroll more effective. And then something that I really want to point out, and I'm just gonna close this here and then just have here my how do you call it, contact details. If you want to contact our company, our team, to solve more questions related to the payroll, or to do the payroll of your company, or to have a strategy for your payroll when you are going to open your company in Colombia. But the last thing that I really want to point out is, like, please think of the income tax of the person that you are bringing to Colombia, or think of the income tax of your employees, because that's a cost to the employee. It would be a great benefit if they understand that, or if they have an understanding of that ahead of time, because sometimes it is a surprise. And another advice that I want to give as an ending conclusion of this talk is that each person case is very different. So please, as if you have your own payroll department, or if you have a payroll outsourcing company, it is very interesting to talk about each case individually, because there are many specific benefits or many specific questions for everybody. So if you solve those questions ahead of time, the employee will have will be focused on their work every month, very tranquil, and they won't be asking questions about their payroll in the future. So that's why it's very important to have an in-board meeting explaining their payroll, what is the strategy, what are the payments, how does it work, and they will have a great time working at your company, and they won't be worried about all these calculations, and you will have everything very well down in your budget. So those are my closing remarks. I don't know, Joanna, if there are any questions that I could solve at the moment.
No tenemos más preguntas. Becky, muchísimas gracias. A todos los asistentes también, muchas gracias por acompañarnos una vez más en toda nuestra sesión de webinar. Que tengan todos un muy buen día. Muchas gracias, Becky.
Muchas gracias a todos, y también una buena mañana, buena tarde para todos.
Gracias. Bye.
Hasta luego.